Hello and welcome to Crowforest the podcast. So last time I gave you a brief introduction to myself and my filmmaking process, and I read the introduction of my memoir, wherein I talk about how I got my start in the early days of Crowforest Productions. So today I am going to continue reading my memoir with the section titled Preproduction, getting into the beginning of how I started the process of filming in the attic. So this is Preproduction. After writing and revising my script, the first thing that I did was to get a printed and spiral-bound copy made. This isn't really a necessary step, since really you can just read it on your phone, but I wanted to have a nice professional-looking physical copy of my first professional script. Then, once that was done, I got right to work on the movie. There was still a ton of work to do even before starting principal photography. For one thing, I wanted to make the miniature even fancier and a better match for the house I was filming in. The house belonged to my sister, and so I didn't have to worry about rent and permits. And I knew that I could go there and film whenever I wanted, so that was a huge advantage. But I still wasn't ready to do that since I had a lot of pre-production work to do. The most major addition I made to the miniature house was to add a garage and an attic, since the original model didn't include those features, and for this movie I was going to need them. Also, my sister had done some redecorating since we filmed Crowforest 2, so I needed to do the same redecorating in the miniature, as well as make some of the existing decorations better. After all, this was for a movie that I hoped would become a hit in a wider market, and not just collect dust on YouTube like my previous movie had done. So I wanted it to look as good as possible. But while I was in the process of decorating, I was struck by an idea. What if the miniature house was just a blank shell at first, with no decorations on the walls and no furniture at the start of the movie, and then gradually over the course of the movie, it slowly came to resemble the large house more and more. This would have the double benefit of making the movie much creepier and giving me additional time to create the new decorations for the miniature house. I think I now understand what they say about the written form of the script being only the first version. Production sees the first rewrite of the script, and editing is the final rewrite of the script. I realized that I didn't have any clue what I was doing on the legal side of things, so I found a copyright attorney online and contacted her. She gave me a lot of really good advice on how to avoid copyright infringements, such as inadvertently showing branded content and trademarks in the background of my movie. I knew that I had a problem, because since I had built my miniature house out of Legos, that meant that every single one of those little bumps on the top layer of bricks had a tiny Lego trademark on it. I could blur it out in post-production, but one thing I've learned is that if there's a way to fix it before you get to post, you're going to be much better off. Blurring that many tiny trademarks in post would be nearly impossible and would take forever, so I needed another solution, and I had an idea. Before starting filming, I took some white paint and painted over the top layer of bricks to conceal the trademarks, essentially blurring them out ahead of time so I didn't have to worry about it later. Also, since this was a physical blur and not a digital one, that meant that it would stay right there on the bricks regardless of what kind of camera motion there was. So I wouldn't have to worry about motion tracking and adjusting the position of the blur effect on every single frame. All in all, this was a much better option. The next problem I had to tackle was that of the Lego minifigures. In Crowforest 2, I had used Lego minifigures to represent people walking around the miniature house, but Lego minifigures are a recognizable trademark, and this time simply painting over them wasn't going to change that. So what I ended up doing was going to Walmart, buying a box of soft wax earplugs, and making my own tiny figures out of the soft wax. The first figure I made ended up being way too big, so I had to try again with less wax, and the second figure ended up being just the right size. but I kept the larger figure because I knew that I would need it for the larger scale model of the miniature house. The miniature house itself is a full and complete set featuring the entirety of the real house, now including the garage and the attic. So that's what I would be using for the majority of the movie, especially any wide shots or zoom-in shots where the full thing would be visible on all or part of the shots. But I knew that I would need a larger, more detailed set for some of the shots, especially the dream sequence, so I needed to build a larger scale model. But unlike the full set, the larger scale model didn't have to be complete. It just needed to include the area of the house that I would be using in that particular sequence. One particular example of the need for a larger scale model was the sequence involving lighting the candles and having them go out. The set piece for this scene is the front hallway altar table, but in the miniature set, the hallway is so tiny that there are absolutely no details on the table. So I had to make a much larger model for that scene, and only show it in close-up so as not to give away the fact that in reality, the set only consisted of 3 walls and a base plate, and was not connected to anything else. The next thing I did was to buy a pair of work gloves and spray paint them white. Once they were dry, I covered the outsides with more of the soft wax earplugs that I had gotten. I ended up buying about 16 boxes of those things. Actually, this is outdated now. I'm up to like 23 or so now. And yeah, I'll probably end up buying more before this is done because, yeah, there's a lot of wax in this movie. Spoilers. They ended up looking really cool, and I knew that they would work well in the dream sequence. But I knew that I would need more than just a point of view shot looking at wax hands. I would also need a wide shot showing the whole wax figure, so I would need a costume. I went to Party City and bought a black blank face mask and covered it with more of the earplug wax, and it looked really cool. So now I had a mask and gloves, but I still needed the rest of the costume. I thought that perhaps a bunch of layered up clear plastic rain ponchos might work, or possibly bubble wrap wrapped all around the person, but I could figure that out later. The mask and gloves were the main things. The rest would just sort of fall into place later, hopefully. I had initially thought that I needed to make tiny outfits for the figures to wear that would match the outfits of the characters. And in fact, I did make one such outfit for the larger scale clay figure, but I decided that much like with the miniature house having plain bare walls at the start of the movie and then gradually coming to match the decorations of the real house, I needed to do the same thing with the wax figures, with them starting out as just plain wax and then gradually coming to resemble the characters, first with the matching clothes and then finally with faces and hair. Which, the test shot that I've done now is really creepy, so something to look forward to. I did a test shot of painting a face and adding hair to the wax figure with the matching clothes, and took still pictures of the process against a green background, so that I would be able to replace the background of the stop-motion sequence in post. And the resulting time-lapse transformation of the figure from plain wax to having a horrific face is very creepy. It's somewhat reminiscent of, but I'm sure in no way ripping off, the scene from A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, wherein a faceless clay mannequin is molded by invisible hands to have the face of Freddy Krueger, through use of a similar stop-motion effect. I absolutely love Elm Street 3, and I was excited to do this homage. And if you are interested in seeing my Halloween special from this year, I talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and I even include this test shot of this wax figure transformation in that review, juxtaposed against the shot from Elm Street 3 that I'm describing here. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out. Additionally, I had gotten my start in film in the field of stop motion, so I was excited to incorporate some stop motion into my movie, even if it was just a few frames. But I was sure that before I had finished the movie, I would have done a few more sequences of stop motion animation, particularly in the dream sequence, wherein I intended to show the mini wax figure walking around the miniature house set. This would have multiple benefits, including acknowledging my roots in stop motion, allowing for overhead shots that would be impossible in the large house, since I don't own a crane, and even if I did, I can't exactly cut a hole in the roof. And finally, it would reduce the number of shots requiring the full wax figure costume, which I now know for sure is very hot. Even in the cold weather that we're having and shooting in my sunroom, it was still quite hot. So yeah, if you're thinking about doing this in your movie, don't. It's not worth it. It would reduce the number of shots requiring the full wax figure costume, which I had still not fully worked out yet. So that was 3 good reasons to do it. Plus, stop motion in the dream sequence just feels right somehow, with the movement of the figures being weird and not quite right, perfect for a dream sequence in which everything is weird and not quite right. The next thing I did was to get some panning shots of the inside of the miniature house and edit together a mock-up of the opening credit sequence I wanted for the movie. I used a temp track of myself playing on my sister's keyboard, with a simple chord progression in the bass and a simple 3-note loop in the treble. It sounded pretty good, and certainly creepy, but it was still pretty basic, and I knew that I really wanted the music for this movie to be something special. So I started looking around for a composer. It was my older sister who ultimately put me onto one, so I contacted him and started the process of working together on the movie. I sent him the rough cut of the opening credits sequence, now featuring his credit in it, as well as the temp music I had used, to give him an idea of the sort of music I was looking for. He said that he really liked it, and that he was excited to work on the movie, but that he didn't want to write any actual music until I had the image-locked scenes to give him, so that he could score to the scene. So I don't have any music quite yet, but as soon as I start filming and get a sequence edited, I'll send it off to him for scoring. It's a huge relief to have such a major component of the movie off my plate. Now I can focus on what I'm actually good at, the visuals. And that also is out of date. I do have some music back from him, and it sounds good, so another thing to look forward to. I still needed to address the issue of furnishing and decorating the miniature house to match the real house. And so, to that end, I placed a Lego order with the components I would need to build the miniature shelving and furniture, as well as the tiny ladder to go up to the miniature attic. Then I went to Michael's craft store, and I went a little crazy on their miniature aisle, buying more miniature items than I probably should have, including a miniature cutting board with bread, a miniature tool bag, and a miniature mug and beer can. I figured I would be able to make use of those items in the movie by buying similar full-sized items and doing either a match cut or a match pan across. Then I went online and found some miniature laundry items on Etsy, including a miniature washer and dryer, and miniature copyright-free detergents and bleach. This would save me a lot of time making miniature props myself, although I still had a lot that I would need to make myself. Before I started filming, I needed to upgrade my camera from what I had been using, so I went to Best Buy and bought a new Canon video camera for about $1,000. I also needed a better dash cam for the driving sequences, so I found one that would shoot 4K and I bought it for about $500. And finally, I needed to upgrade my editing software from what I had been using, so I purchased Final Cut Pro for $300. Additionally, my legal fees had included $430 to my attorney and $600 to the government. Between my large purchases and my smaller purchases like the earplugs and other supplies, as well as SD cards, I had already spent well over $3,000, and I hadn't even started filming yet. And on top of that, I didn't know yet what the music would end up costing, as the price varies according to how much is needed. The price might be reduced by repeating the score and looping, or it might be increased by needing an original song for every minute of the film. But either way, this is going to be an expensive film, at least by my standards. I really hope that this investment pays off, or I'm going to be in trouble. So that is it for the pre-production section of my memoir, and if you're laughing about how I think that this is going to be an expensive film, yes, I realize that my budget of $7,000 is a shoestring budget in terms of filmmaking, but yeah, this is definitely the most expensive thing that I have ever done. I'm used to working on budgets of maybe $1,000. Crowforest, the movie, was, I guess, around $1,000. Actually, I think Crowforest 1 and 2 combined were around $1,000 just because of so many Lego orders and building the miniatures. But other than that, I tend to film just pretty much no budget productions for YouTube, just using what I have on hand and any resources that I have available, stuff that I find, anything like that. So, yeah, for me, this is quite a large budget, but at the same time, like, I don't want to gamble any more money than that. This is money that I've managed to save up from just working retail for the past 7 years, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to bank up a good chunk of what I've made over the past 7 years because of having been able to live rent-free with my parents for a good chunk of that. So certainly not everyone is able to do that, but I've been fortunate in that area. And so this is a self-funded movie. I'm not going through investors. The goal is to make it for $7,000, and we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, this has been episode 2 of Crowforest the podcast. I hope you found this informative and helpful, and I hope to see you next time.